please join me in welcoming Liat Segal.
Thank you, Skip, and I'm very happy to be here with you and to be part of this series. And for me, being here is very meaningful because the time when I made the switch from science and tech to art was about the time of my last visit here at Stanford in 2009. And I'll tell you about this time and the trajectory I did soon. But I think that being here again reminded me that this also had some place in helping me do the shift and pushing me forwards to what I actually do today. So before I start, I'll show you some images of how a studio of an artist that deals with technology may look like. So I have areas for electronics, for mechanics, for construction. I have my art there. I have a very versatile space that can accommodate many technical needs for my work. And having said that, I will go back to my background and tell you what are my tools and what I do with them. So I originally come from a background of science. I have a master's degree from Tel Aviv University in computer science and biology. I was doing machine learning or AI before it was called AI back then. And later on, I had another master's degree actually at a university based in San Francisco called Minerva, where I did data analysis. And that was through my, when I was already doing my career as an artist. So I never really left data and science and technology. And this is part of my language and my tools and my inspiration as well. I want to show you some early works before I move on to things that maybe more present what I do today, just to show you some of this transitional practice. So this is the first work I showed, and since I don't have a background in a formal background in art, and I don't come from an art school, many times it's easy for a young artist to show their work in galleries and in museums if they don't come from the schools. So at first I showed them in tech environments, and that was my first painting machine that took information from Google Trends. It was a tool by Google, it still is, that allows you to know statistics of searches a long time. So I made queries of a few words, and each word was represented by a different color that was painting through this machine. And doing so, I was asking mostly questions about what I'm doing as an artist, or I didn't call myself an artist at the time, but what I wanted to do. Because I created a machine, I used data that wasn't mine. It was Google, it was collected by many people. And I used it in a way that it was not predictable by me, because once I activated the machine, I was an observer like anybody else. Like I didn't know what was going to happen. So who was the creator, or what was the creation? Was the creation the final bits, or the machine, or the data? And I must say, I asked this question at my early days as an artist many times, and I never got a real answer. But at some point, I said, okay, I had enough with this question. I'm going to move on. I think that was my way of just igniting or kickstarting my process. I deal a lot with transformation of data to this physical world still today. And part of my examinations of that was through many materials that maybe weren't very standard for representation of data. And one of them is sand, for example, which flows the minute after I draw this drawing, it started disassembling. I was painting very detailed images with it on the sand, but then I just let it disappear. Here I played with animation. I was just experimenting many things first. And with a similar process, I was also painting, for example, with water. And this is actually one of the works that I showed at my first soul show that was at 2014, that was called People You May Know, like the Facebook suggestion to know, make new acquaintances, whether they're real or not, you decide. But this work represented this endless so-called connection that appears in our life and disappears at the same time of its appearance. And the machine writes the names of Facebook friends of mine, and they're written with water, and then they disappear, they evaporate and disappear at the same time. I moved forward a little bit in time to a work that I did in 2016 in a social where I had as part of an artist in residence program in Berlin. It was time before the US election on the first Trump, when he first won. And the term of fake news started gaining public attention. And at this work, which was called This Is Not a Typewriter, I created a fake news generator. And we're talking about days way before AI. So generated text was just a curious, maybe. So I created a very naive algorithm. It wasn't AI based even, that generated fake news. And then the machine created codings and mappings of these texts into visual signals. So this is an example of such a text. It may, if you read it, it may sound human, but it's not very coherent as well. It's taken from many online sources, and it's mixed and repeatedly mixed until it creates some text that is originated by a prompt as well, similar to what we do now. That was in 2016. And these mapping systems that were done, visualized by the machine, tried to get some visualization that cannot be read back. So I don't try to map the data in a way that is very precise. In fact, I do the opposite. I always invite randomness to my process. And that's something that was done very intuitively at the beginning, but at some point I realized that that is part of my process. Randomness is a very important thing for me. And I'll show you this in many of the later works, but I think that for me, when I think about randomness, I think about what is humane. Because I'm using very technological materials and techniques. And when something is very precise, controlled, and technological, it doesn't feel human. When it's totally chaotic and random, it doesn't feel human as well. And I feel that humanity is somewhere in between, and there is some sweet spot of humanity that is very hard to predict. And you know it when you see it, in a sense. And I always try to find this area that has some humanity, because what I'm interested in as an artist is not the technology per se, even though technology is the most important part probably of my physical action and my material, but I'm interested in what it's like to be a human in a very technological time and in general, but this is the time that we are living in. So what I actually did here is, for example, to take the text that was generated, and the text is represented by letters that can be mapped to numbers, ASCII numbers. And in this mapping, for example, each of these numbers was represented by a length of a line, but also a length of a space. So you have information here in both the lines and the space between them. Theoretically, you could take a ruler and start measuring these lines and read the text back. And I say theoretically because, as I said, there is a lot of randomness that is involved. when I build my machines, and everything is done in-house at my studio, these are not ready-mades. I never buy an off-the-shelf machine. I always build them. And intentionally, I don't try to have industrial standards of precision. And for example, I use, and maybe you saw it at the video before, I use a paintbrush and ink that is pumped through the paintbrush. So here, when you see the images, the paintings, you see that the fibers of the brush are pressed on the paper, similarly to the way a human painter would have that held. But you can also see something that is mechanical, and because the fibers are always positioned on the same direction. There are never two paintings that will be alike because the paintbrush will change along time, and randomness will enter through drops that are dropped. Maybe some glitches and bugs can be part of this work as well. And since we're here, and this is something I don't usually show, but this is an image from a research I did back in my days as a scientist. And I show you this image because I find a lot of similarity in the visual language, I'm sorry, that I had back then to what I do today. So, and the two works kind of have some resemblance to me. I'll move forward to work I did in collaboration with a ceramic artist, Roy Mayan. And in this work, we created a machine that writes sounds on ceramic plates. And I was talking before with Ellen about the work that is done in a similar context. So what we did here, we took ready-made plates. You can see what on this throwing wheel, covering the plates with glaze, overglaze. And then he passes the plates to me, to the machine, and I control some of the parameters of the machine, such as the sensitivity it has to sound, how fast it moves, the radius that changes. And this is my effect on my hand writing on these writings. But let me just show you this with a little more sound. So we had a few times that we did this project in various ways. This was the first one. It was the Ceramics Biennial in Cluj. And we invited the visitors to just perform in a way. And you saw that all the people that were activating the machine were just visitors of the exhibition. So it was a performative work. And after we wrote the sounds that were sampled through these interactions with the people, we took these plates to the kiln and fixed the glaze on them. These are examples of some of the plates. A work I did in 2019 was called FOMO, Fear of Missing Out. It was presented at Petah Tikva Museum in Israel, and it was a large-scale installation. Each of these creatures is about this height, the height of a child, and they can get out of balance and into balance. And for me, when I say that I build machines, so this is also a machine, but they don't necessarily look like a machine. You would not necessarily call them machines. But what happens here is that this is actually a simulation, a physical simulation of a social network, because each of these creatures is connected to some others in this community. And whenever they're starting some spontaneous motion, they're transmitting it to their friends, their peers in the network. And the peers that hear that something great is happening somewhere else, they want to join. So they're likely to start moving as well. But very quickly, they start searching what else is happening somewhere else, and they'll stop moving. So we see waves of motion going through the gallery space with these creatures. And in terms of the concept of FOMO, fear of missing out, that is something that we feel more and more through social media and through our digital life today, I wanted to have some visual aspect of that in the sense that they are all literally cast by the same mold, but each one also has some gold leaves that are spread randomly on top of them. So each one is unique. Like I could not reproduce the same creature twice. And each one in their own eyes is a unique snowflake in the world as well, even though they behave in a very consistent way. All of them behave according to the same algorithm. And they're all autonomously moving. So there's no computer that directs them to move. Each one has a set of rules. Whenever they have a signal of somebody's active, they have some likelihood of joining this motion, and at some point, this motion stops. And that's the way it looks from the inside. So as I said, everything is built at the studio, from the electronics to the mechanics to the actual structure. So whenever I'm working on a big project, I have a group of assistants working with me, because many times it looks like a factory. There are so many repetitive actions that need to be done that I have a team that evolves according to the needs of each specific project. And this is a solo show I had the same year, 2019. And it's very much connected also to research that I did back in my science days, but also to something that is very essential to me and to how I see life. So the show was called Random Walk, and Random Walk is a computational model that allows researchers making analysis of situations that have a repetitive randomness inherently in them. And this is basically everything from weather to social situations to economy. Everything around us almost can be described by random walks. But there is a toy problem that is used in mathematics for that, which says that I hold a coin, and if I flip the coin and there is a head, I'll take one step right, and if it's tail, I'll take one step left. And researchers do delicious things with this small toy problem. And I essentially took this toy problem and I physically built a machine that flips a coin repetitively again and again. And above this machine, there was a camera that was connected to a computer that analyzed the result, whether it's a head or a tail. And these results were coded into zeros and ones and affected everything else at the show. So the next project in this exhibition was this creature, which is quite big. It's 2 meters in diameter, 3.5 meters towards the gallery space, and composed of over 1,000 flexible tapes. They're all connected through ropes, heavy ropes, into a motor that moves them from side to side. And each time, every few seconds, the new location of this creature is set by the flips of the coins. So every time the last flips of coins will determine where this creature will head next. Here again, there is an official side of randomness, but still there are many things that are not in my control, like even the AC that is moving these little tapes, or people that are crossing in front of it. So there are many forces and many aspects of randomness. So if we had the cause and the effect, this is the ripple. This is the next part of the show, which is composed of over 600 glasses. Each glass is half filled with water and it has a small magnet inside, and the glasses are all positioned upside down. So the water is locked between the glass and the surface. Below the surface, there is a mechanism that moves many strong magnets. So whenever they move, they change the magnetic field above them and create these little waves inside, in the water inside the glasses. We can see them here. This is all affected again by a camera that is positioned on top. And whenever there is motion, either by the creature over there, the effect, or by people passing, it will be reflected in the motion of the water inside the glasses. And when I think about the concept of randomness versus control, that is mainly because this is how I feel that we can make plans and try to set our life years ahead. If we do this, this will happen, but then random things just happen. And as I said, this show was in 2019, and just a few months after it closed, we had COVID, and all my plans went differently, of course, and I guess all of our plans. I had another representation of random walk. If that was random walk, so this was random walk 2.0. And that was a two-dimensional representation of that. So I created more simulations. This time, instead of just having a right or left through the flip of a coin, I created a simulated coin that could set an angle and also randomize the length of the step. And each simulation had 1,000 steps. And there were computerized simulations. And then after each simulations of 1,000 steps, I painted them through the painting machine, and then I changed color, but I never washed the tubes of the machine. So the randomness was entered this work through the colors that changed as well. So in this case, this work had 27 layers, which means 27,000 steps. And I played a lot with these concepts. Here you can see the computer simulation versus the actual paintings. And for example, these works were another step of this series. So here I added another constraint and I said, okay, we have this random walk, but here I said that the walk is more likely to work through some mathematical function. In this case, it's a circle. And what I had in mind when I did that was that I imagine that we have, for example, some sugar, and we create now a circle of sugar on the floor, and ants will start coming and taking a grain of sugar, go to the nest, come back, and what I will see as the creator of this circle is a circle of ants and a line going to the nest. And I know that I controlled their position in some way, but each ant, assumingly, thinks that it has free will. It chooses this specific grain, going to the nest, coming back, doing what it wants, you know? And this is us, of course. So this is another manifestation of this concept with a spiral. I do a lot of collaborations. Some of them are with artists in different disciplines and some with scientists. And this work that we see here is a work that is done in collaboration with Professor Yasmin Maroz from Tel Aviv University, who is a good friend of mine and a constant collaborator. And we actually share a history because we did our master degree at the same lab. So Yasmin is a physicist and she's now a researcher, a PI at Tel Aviv University. And she studies behaviors of plants. And basically what Yasmin says is that if you define what a behavior is, she can show that it exists in plants and she models it through mathematical approaches. So here we see that the plants have, and of course we see it in fast forward, but we see that they have strategic behaviors they have learning abilities, they have responses to stimuli. They're doing very complicated behaviors, just that these behaviors are very slow because they're driven by growth. And we as humans usually don't see them. So we treat them as something that is very different from what we expect a behavior or a behaving creature to be. And what we did in the project that is called tropism was inspired very much by this experiment, where you take some growing shoots and you have a directional light from one side, and then the shoot will grow to that side. I'm sure you know that whenever you put a plant on the window, and then you change the position of the light and they will change the direction. And Yasmin's research does a lot with that. But what we actually did at the Tel Aviv University Art Gallery was that we created a large-scale installation of 24 shoots. Each one is a soft robot that is about 3 meters height. We had, the gallery space is 15 meter over 15 meter. It's quite big. And they're all soft robots in the sense that they move in a very analog way. So they also have 4 light sensors at their base, and whenever the lighting is changing in space, they will always try to optimize the light, just like the plants do. So they will try to reach the light, but as we change the light quicker than they can move, they will never get to the light. They will keep, we kind of messed with the plants. So they will keep moving and trying to get to the light, but will never do. In terms of materials, we used, I'll show you here, we used this magenta light like is used in a growing light at the nursery. And the robots were covered with carbon fibers, both because it is connected to the physiological plants, but also because it had some surreal, futuristic aspect in that. So we were kind of on the border between something that is natural to something that is very surreal. And this again is what you see on the inside at the studio. So the bases are made of concrete. The inside of these robots are made of duct hoses covered by the carbon fibers. This is the electronics that we developed for the project. Which brings me to a project that was displayed until not recently for almost a year at the Wende Museum in Los Angeles. And this is actually through the museum, or in respect to the museum, I also met Skip, who invited me to this series, and was a part of this making this project happening. And this is a project that was very special to me because it reflected an ongoing situation in my life. This project started I think 3 years ago. I started working on it around 3 years ago. And through this, the work on this project, and I'll tell you more about what it is, 2 major things happened in my life. One of them was that the war between Israel and Gaza started. And the other, that a month later, my son was born. And these 2 things affected very much the work, and I think it's one of my most personal works in many senses. And what I did at this work that was called Hyperreality was that I covered all the museum windows with paintings that were created with a painting machine. They were painted at the studio on a transparent vinyl and then installed on the windows. And the concept of hyperreality, which started, like I started thinking about it before all these events happened, but I feel that it's very much connected to what we experience in this digital age, It's a concept that was turned by Baudrillard that tried to describe the situation that we believe images more than our actual physical reality. We treat them more real than the real reality around us. And I say real, but I don't know what is more real, for example. I can have my son next to me, but I will look at my phone, and at that very moment, my phone will have a stronger effect than my son that will take my hand here. You know, I'm sure you know this feeling from one way or the other. So I tried, I'll show you some more of these images. I tried to take I think we had around 70 images drawn, many images that reflect my reality, reflect things that I believe in, things that are part of my daily life, and paint them through the painting machine with a process that starts by a digital filter of the image. I start by an image, and then I create this dot image that abstracts the original image, and then it goes through the machine that gives it more abstraction through the paintings. And eventually we see these images that if you don't know the origin, many times you will not even recognize them. So there is a major abstraction about these works. Here we can see, for example, missile strikes at the war next to my parents holding my newborn son. Sorry. And I tried to have something that represents my life, but again, this time that we live in is very much affected by how we see the world through the digital realm. And what I know about my reality many times come from the digital realm. And I don't know what is true and what is not, in this sense. I'm moving to another work that is a first work that became part of a long-term series. And this work was also done with Yasmin Meroz, and my collaborator at Tropism. And it's a work that was sent to the ISS in 2022 as part of the AX-1 private mission to the ISS. So that was the first private mission to the ISS where 4 astronauts went and spent over a week, almost 2 weeks at the ISS. And during their time on the ISS, they had educational and scientific and artistic missions. So I was approached by one of the astronauts to suggest an idea, an artistic idea for a project. And what I started thinking about when I had this incredible opportunity was what I can do there that I cannot do on Earth. And that is actually something I'm many times thinking of when I'm thinking of the work, but that was an extreme case of that, I think. So Yasmin and I started the work from this concept, and we understood that we wanted to work with water in space. And we created this sculpture that it's pretty small. It's about 20 centimeters height. And we had, since we had a lot of constraints of what can be sent to space in terms of size, of volume and weight, of materials, because it's not FedEx, you know, it's a bit more, okay, a bit more problematic. So this work was folded into a very small box. And basically what we did, we wanted to create a sculpture that looks like it was taken from a gallery space, from a white cube. It is made of a shiny brass on a white pedestal, but it's with the contrast of the very technical view of the ISS behind it. And this sculpture is partly made of water, hence it's impossible to create on Earth, because on Earth the water will just spill. And in space, they create this structure and dynamics that cannot be predicted by us. So that's what happened on the ISS when it was activated by the astronauts and documented by them. And when we started thinking about the project and started creating the shape of it, we didn't know exactly what will happen. And we had some hypotheses. So at first we thought that if the material was very hydrophilic, for example, we'll get an envelope of water around the sculpture. If it's very hydrophobic, the water will just be secreted out. So we knew it's probably going to be somewhere in between. But other than that, we really didn't know what will happen. So for us, when we got these videos back a few weeks after the actual mission, it was like very exciting. I think we both were in tears when we saw that. Which brings me to the future. So as I said, the possible object was the first of a series. When we made it, we didn't know it's going to be a series because we just started with this project. But then we were approached by we had another opportunity that started with a company that's called LifeShip that created a time capsule shaped as a pyramid that is joining Astrolab's rover that is planned to be launched in June to the moon. And LifeShip suggested that we cover the outside of the pyramid with a work. And as I said, for us, for me and Yasmin, it's really important to have a work done specifically to the location that it is sent to. And when we started thinking of what we can do on the moon, we had lots of ideas to do a work with the moon dust, and the moon dust electrical statics. And we thought of many aspects of that, but then we realized that the work is going to be static. So we said, okay, we want to have a series where each work out of 4 works will represent something about humanity that is symbolized by a fundamental element. So we had water already, and then we wanted to go to the ancient fundamental elements of fire, earth, and air and wind. So the entire series is planned to have a work of water around Earth that was already done, wind in Mars, fire in the sun, and dust or earth on the moon. And that's the major, like the long-term sun shot, let's say, not even moon shot, it's going to be a sun shot. So this is the pyramid. This is the actual pyramid when it's the way it's going to be sent. And this is what we actually carved on the pyramid. So we created physical simulations, computerized simulations according to current day particle physics on what represents fire, air, water, and earth. And this is what we see here. So I think we're about to run out of time. So I'll conclude with these 2 publications. One of them is a paper that Yasmin and I wrote about collaborations of art and science, because we have a long way by now of these kind of collaborations, and we see our collaborations as very successful, especially because they don't stay only in the art world and only in the science world. I think that our collaboration, and the way we see it at least, is so successful because it affected both our careers in general. And Yasmin, for example, took some concepts of what we did, what we experimented with it at the art world, and took it to her research, and so did I. And I think that when we tried to formalize what we're doing and why it is so beneficial for both of us, we understood that for us at least is because of the random and serendipity element in this kind of collaborations, because we get away from what we usually do. We do something that is very playful, very different from what we do. We do have a shared language, so for us, it's a very natural collaboration as well. And we say that for us, it's the fairy dust of good research on one hand and good art on the other hand. It gets us out of our comfort zone. So I think that's a good point to finalize my talk, and I would love to hear from you if you have questions or comments.
Thank you. I guess I'll start with one. So first a comment and then a question. The story that you told about the ant and the sugar, I very much related to that. I don't.
Are you there?
I'm pretty sure that ant and that felt very close to home. So a couple of maybe a couple of questions here. So most artists want to know exactly what they have at the end, and they know something is done, and that is not at all consistent with what you do. You are building something, it's kinetic. You do sort of let the viewer decide who is the artist, and you are very conscious in almost everything. Your hand is nowhere to be seen, really, whereas people talk so much about an artist's hand in the work. And the idea that you were trained as a scientist and now as an artist. So over the years, how do you think your training as a scientist helped with your art? And do you now look back on your education as a scientist slightly differently? And if you could maybe talk about how those two things interact and in what you decide to make. And also beyond this, are there any other things that you see that you're particularly curious about and want to try to make something about it?
So I think you had 5 questions.
Okay.
I counted.
One more. It's a subsection of one.
So I'll try to remember and remind me if I don't. So first of all, regarding my background, I think that the way, like, we nothing is wasted, like, and that's true to no matter what background we have. I think that I could not have done what I do without going through my past. It's part of my language and my inspiration and my tools and my environment. And I would probably, if I went to art school, I would create completely different kind of art, I'm sure. Maybe the things that I would be interested in would be like similar, or I don't know. But I know that when I needed to decide what I was gonna study, for example, I was very much, and it's funny, we were talking about that yesterday, I was very much in conflict between these two sides in my life. I had an artistic side. I think that science has a lot of creativity and artistic in them, but let's call it a different discipline, and the scientific and technological side. And my I defaulted into science, I think. But I think that gave me many tools to do what I do today. And again, I wouldn't be able to do it otherwise, not in this way. What was the other question?
Oh, yeah. Maybe just other things that you're thinking about or you're seeing in the world today that interests you, that you might think you want to make something.
So first of all, I'm interested by so many things, and I have a notebook, and whenever I have something that I'm interested in, I write it down. And many times I go back to these concepts and ideas whenever I'm looking for an idea for a new project. So I would say that I don't want to be specific because there are so many things that are interesting. They don't necessarily have to be technological or scientific or I think that I'm mostly interested in humanity in this sense, and that's true to this question as well, because there are so many things that are happening today in our society, in our politics, in our economics, that I'm okay. I find myself with no tools other than my artistic tools to handle. So this is something that is very much on my mind, and I'm very curious and afraid of what this future will bring. So I handle it with my artistic tools, basically.
Have you ever thought you had something random, but there actually ended up being a pattern that you discovered later? And then secondly, have you ever had, in the paintings that you had that were on the windows, have you ever put one of those paintings into like had a machine learning look at it and try to translate back? You know how you can, if you have something that translates a language and then you say, then reverse translate and there's a drift. Have you tried doing that, or?
So I haven't tried doing that. Sometimes when I do this process, I consciously know that the information is there one way or the other.
Yeah.
Theoretically, it can be done, but as a statement, I don't do that. But when you started asking this question, before you finished your question, what my mind went to is that I think that my personal trajectory is something that can be described by something that I thought was random, but looking back, I see that it is not necessarily random, because I think that when I started working as an artist, I was very much working from intuition. I started building this machine and that, and I didn't know how to put that in words. And only looking back after years of practicing as an artist, that I could look to the very first works and see that all everything was there, that from the beginning. So that is something that I guess comes from my patterns in a way, how I see the world and what I'm interested in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is the curiosity that you bring to science different from the curiosity that you bring to art?
I don't know if I would say different. I think that science, and here I can say that I'll take science apart from tech. Science is a longer process, and it takes a lot of patience. And I think that while I very much enjoyed science and being part of that because I was curious about it, I don't think I make a good scientist because I don't have the patience. And I think that I'm very much curious about things that I didn't do before. So almost every project that I do has something that I don't know how to do. And that's a technical side of that. So I jump into the water, into something that I have no idea how I will make, and then I need to learn. And so but that's part, like, I think I like the adrenaline about it, but also the curious, that's part of my curious side. So that's one thing. I lost my line of thought here, but I don't know if I answered. Yeah.
First of all, your artwork is absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
I was wondering, you mentioned early on about how all the machines you made are created in-house, and you kind of use them almost as a paintbrush. I was wondering if you view them as a tool or as like a part of the artwork.
So I guess this is both. I think it's.
I don't know if people are, did everybody hear the question?
So I'll repeat, or I'll repeat what I hear from you at least. So I was asked if the technology that is created, since I create everything in-house, whether the technology is part of my process, like my hand my handline as an artist, but only as a methodology to create something, and whether the art is the technology or the product, let's call it, of the technology. Am I correct? So I think that all of the above, basically. So for me, I feel that there is a hand in that, and it's my hand. I think that this is why it is really important for me to create everything at the studio. If I would create a spec and send it to some factory, it would be a completely different work. And many of the decisions that I do through the work that are artistic decisions are done in correspondence to the technical constraints or process of development, and it comes together. So I cannot separate the two.
So a little picking up of one of Skip's first questions around this being so brilliant and unique, because the art is many of us are used to seeing completed works of art that are put on a wall and can be moved around and outlive the artist and can be appreciated. So given the complexity of what you do and how it's never fully complete, but changes every time you do it, how do you think about how this will this outlive you? Are you patenting it or creating structures that other people can replicate beyond when you might want to do it or after you're gone? How does this art sort of look 50 years from now? How will people look back on it?
So that's a really good question that I don't have a good answer to. And I think that's both a practical question that I face like in my practice, because if I sell a work, for example, which is technological work, do I sell it with a warranty? Like, do I need to, if it breaks, do I come and repair it? I have the knowledge, it's done in-house. So like there's no technician that you can call to repair it. Or do I, like, you know, there are many technological artists backing from around almost the 50s or 60s. And I think the technology changed so much. So today, like, would you replicate those works, and how would you replicate those works if you works that were shown in you know, old TVs are now shown on screen? Would that be like for video work? Would that be the same work? I don't know. I think that part of this process is to let go of the concept of that an art piece will outlive the artist in this sense. And I think that part of my research on that, my personal research on that, is through works that by definition cannot exist after the show. So even the work that we did at the Wende Museum, after like the show ended, we had to peel them off the windows, and most of them went to the trash. And that is something that, like, it's funny, I had conversations with Skip about it. What do we do with the work? And I try to think a lot about what I want to do with this work, because for me, it would, like, I'm always saddened by that. You know, there is eventually you lose something when a work like that just goes to the trash. It's you know, it's not intuitive for you. But that is part of the story of the work as well. And when I have a work that paints with water, it cannot be, like, you know, like it's ephemeral by nature, by definition, almost. But the question goes beyond this, because I think that we will face this question more and more as technological art becomes a stronger, takes a stronger space in the art world. So people will have to find answers, and I think that the answers will be personal as well, because it's going to be part of what the artists feel about their work specifically.
And thank you so much for thought-provoking talk.
Thank you.
And much of your work, materialize digital data into physical form. So we are now living in a world that our existence is often mediated by data algorithm. How did you think through this process, this lab, that it affecting our presence?
So I think that this is something that I learned through the works, but I think that even before becoming an artist, when I was working as a scientist, I tried to learn about life through data. And like back then, my research was using computational methods of natural language processing on DNA, for example. So I think that this is very strong part of my process in general. I think I lost my line of thought again, but can you repeat
I love your name because I'm also a biologist.
Yeah.
Study DNA.
Yeah, thank you.
So just follow your train of thought.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
was thinking about, in this world, our digital presence is being affected by data algorithm
Yeah,
and
and
physical form.
so I think that we will face this more and more as AI is now a very strong part of our life, and data is not only representing our life, but is also generating and affecting very practical aspects of everything now. And data, in this sense, does not try to represent accurately something. It is something that has a life of its own now as well through AI. So I think we're going to have a very complicated relationship with data in in our future in general.
We have complicated presence.
That's true.
Oh, Stuart?
And then
Go ahead.
So I'm interested in the also derivative from what Skip started with the hand of the painter, but I'm struck by how beautiful every piece is.
Thank
And especially like the random walk with the pendulum, it's just incredibly beautiful.
Thank you.
Wondering, but also the process of the machine is the critical part and the randomness. So does the machine, are you picking only the beautiful pieces? Does the machine make an ugly piece?
Yeah, I have lots of ugly pieces. I think that there are no, like, I don't see it as ugly versus beautiful.
Of course.
Like it's mostly about thinking and telling a story. So in this sense, that's my official answer at least. But my practical answer is that when I work, at least on painting machines, for example, the process is also a process that involves aesthetics, and that's a very subjective process. So what eventually is shown on display at the gallery, at the museum, is one stop of the process, of an ongoing process. And there are many, many, many works that were thrown to the trash before it. And we can call them sketches as well, but I could have theoretically decided to stop there, because this process involves maybe not sketching with a pencil, but writing a code or changing something with the machine, and and the work evolves with it. And I think also in terms of
The aesthetic doesn't end up like you're thinking in your mind and you keep tweaking the machine.
So many times I have an ability to visualize the work to a great extent, but again, the works inherently have things that are not predictable even by the creator of the work. And I assume that's true, by the way, to any line of work in art, or not only in art. You can visualize to some extent.
Well, sure. So, I too was struck by the beauty of the work, particularly the stimulation. I'm very wow. Take something that happens at a scale that we don't see, and you show how the influence actually is, which really is the leader to my question. We're washing data of all sorts, and one of the challenges with data is that we take those data and we infer things from those, but we don't actually see. We read things that we think we would see, but we don't actually see. This is very true, actually, DNA population biology. I am a physician scientist around DNA and that. So what I'm wondering about is that what you do is you allow us to see things that happen at scales that matter, and it gets us to realize the beauty of that. What would you actually like us to see?
It's a good question. I think that many times my works, eventually what you see is something that is abstract, but it comes from figures, from data. And in this sense, I see it as, even you can call it figurative works, because it comes from figures. The definition of a figurative work stands for that. But I think that if you ask what I want people to see, I think it's not necessarily seeing, it's experiencing. Because when you go into an exhibition, and it doesn't matter if it's technological or not, either it touches you or not. So in my case, because it's technological, many times I'm also asked about the process and the technology a lot. But for me, if you enter the gallery and it doesn't touch you before you know anything about the work, then the work is not good. It has to touch you. And then I think, again, like in other disciplines of art, you learn the story, and if you're interested in that, you write the text, you read the text of the show, and then you start thinking about it, and that it gives you more layers of feelings or of understandings of the work. And I think that for me, like I hope that at the very least, people will get to the first layer. Anything else is really an extra. But if you enter the space and it makes you feel something before you know anything about the work, that's where I want to be.
One last Stuart had one.
Okay, last question. Mitra, last one. Oh, we have two. Okay, we'll go Mitra, then Dan.
I was just wondering when you will be visiting the space station and the moon and then Mars.
That's a good question. If anybody can help me arrange a ticket, then I would be very happy to do that pretty soon. I think I can arrange a babysitter for that.
Yeah, I'll be a babysitter.
That's a good question. But answering seriously, I don't know when I'll personally be. I think that if you look at the timeline of how both space traveling evolved and also just flights, aviation evolved, I think that I'll take this question personally, because I think of my family, for example. My grandparents, they were travelers. And in the 60s, they were traveling, they were in Japan and the Philippines and in many places. And that was the 60s. And they were just, middle class. They had a shop in a suburb of Tel Aviv, but they managed to do that. And I think aviation started early in the 20th century, more or less, you can say that. So it took around 60 years for them, like every people from your neighborhood, basically, to just be able to get on a plane. And I think, okay, so space travel started like way we already passed this time, but at the AX-1 mission, people bought a ticket basically and went through a year of preparation and then got to the ISS. So I think this time shortens, and hopefully in the next, let's say, 10, 20 years, I'll be able to buy a ticket as well. So that's my technical answer to that.
You should be given a free ticket. We over.
Yeah, but the other side of that is that I send my works to space. So if I manage to send my work to the sun, the Mars, moon, that would be as close as getting myself.
I just want to ask more about, could you tell us more about how these collaborations come about? Like, do you email them? Do you meet them on the street? Like, how do you form these collaborations, and or are they introductions by friends? Or
So I think that one future collaboration can start here, you know? I think that anytime I reach out, anytime I speak with people that are interesting and are interested, you never know. Like, I feel that you shoot in all directions and some hit. And many times when I speak with somebody and we have some chemistry, 2 years later, some opportunity will come and they'll remember that we spoke about something. And that's not different than a tech world, than, you know, I think that every person who was involved in a startup will say something that is pretty similar to that. So you never know. Like, for me, just being curious, learning what other people are doing, talking about my work is the beginning of any collaboration I ever started. So, and will ever start.
When you're starting your process, you start by saying, like, here's a technology, here's an idea, here's a process, here's an algorithm, here's a data set. And any one of those could be a starting point. And or how do you start?
So all of the above, depending on the project. Sometimes I have an opportunity from a location, from a gallery, from a museum, and then I start thinking what I want to do there. And many times I go back to many ideas that I had before and were never realized until that point, and something clicks, you know. And many times the ideas come from the space or from the opportunity. And sometimes, you know, things start organically as well. Like, I just want to try something. But many times, because of the scale of my works, I have to, practically speaking, I have to start working on a project when I have actual, the actual opportunity rises, because it involves a lot of space or funding, or, you know. So I guess it comes many times from inspiration of either the technology or the story that I want to tell or talk or research through the work, but either can be a starting point.
Let's thank Liat.
Really interesting for me to talk with you. Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Yes, yes. Okay, that's great. Yeah.